Hey everyone. So while I turn this on, I have a question for you. Do you, like me, have in-laws or parents who say that they don't have a clue what it is you do for a living? Yeah, so I might talk to them, my in-laws, for instance, in one way. If I talk to them in the way that I'm going to be speaking to you this morning, they wouldn't have a clue what I was talking about. And that's because context is key. So I was just thinking about that a few minutes ago. This podium here has a W on it. This is the W Hotel. I was walking along the corridor, and I saw a W on a door there, and it was next door to another door that had an M. So it was the women's room. It wasn't W Hotel offices or anything like that. Context is key in just about everything that we do. Context is important if you're going to disambiguate information that's found in text. We all know that. There are various techniques, technical techniques, that are used for disambiguation, for recognition of the information content of text and information content of other types of information, not just text, that concern us now and will concern us even more in the years to come. Other forms of so-called unstructured information might be images or audio or video, which you could see as a mashup of synchronized mashup of audio and images. In any case, context is really key, and it's the key word I would choose in describing where we are with text analytics and where we are with much of analytical computing this year in 2012. I kind of set myself an exercise to think about, let's call it a key term for a given year. Last year in 2011, my keyword was, well, it was the year of the graph. And graph, that means not some data chart, but a means of representing information, connected information, information that is contextualized relative to other information. So I'm going to talk about that kind of stuff. I'm not going to look much at the history of text analytics. Really, I'm going to try to give you a picture, my picture, of where we are now and where we're heading. I gave a somewhat similar talk at the Lexalytics user group conference last year, and I'm really thrilled that I was invited back, so it must mean I gave a decent talk. So I'm going to use a few slides from last year. I don't, if you don't know who I am, the easiest way to find out is to follow my Twitter ID, which you can follow to other pages and so on. So I will give little tidbits of autobiography as I go along. I don't think it's really important to say a whole lot more other than I work as an industry analyst in text analytics, longer than just about any other industry analyst, with the exception perhaps of Sue Feldman here. So anyway, and also as a consultant and a writer. So moving on, I'm going to start with a slide that I used last year, and I'm going to ask you the same question I asked people, who is this, last year? Who knows? You people are no better than yes. Yes, Alan Turing, whose 100th birth anniversary is coming up in just about 3 weeks, I believe. I think it's June 23rd. So we have the Turing centenary. It's a big deal in England, which is where he lived and worked, on not only theoretical basis of computing, Turing machines and so on, but also very notably on cryptography during the Second World War. Turing's really a seminal figure in analysis of language in a number of ways, including the articulation of the Turing test as a mechanism for telling whether a machine is truly intelligent. This is one way of telling whether a machine is intelligent, whether a human can have a conversation with a machine and not be able to distinguish whether it is a machine on the other end of teletype line, because we're talking about decades and decades ago, whether it's a human or a machine on the other end of the line. So a slide from last year's presentation, we still have a race. I like this photograph. Turing was a marathon runner. We still have a race toward trying to enable machines to not only understand human language and make use of it in business processes, whatever business means to you, but also ways to have machines communicate in ways that are meaningful to humans. And of course, the word meaningful I chose very deliberately here. Another slide that I had from last year that I have no updates to, I talked about milestones and goals for text analytics in 2011. Really, I wouldn't change this slide. You can see what I have here, starting with, this is actually a progression of items here, starting with language plus understanding. By plus, I mean more than just written text. I mean spoken text, what I'm doing right now. And other forms of, I like to say, so-called unstructured information, because if text or spoken language were truly unstructured, you would not understand what I'm saying right now. As we all know, language, whether spoken or written, the words have so-called morphological structure. We have syntax, the way that words are strung together. We have a larger form of structure, a narrative structure. This talk has a narrative structure. It has a beginning, a middle, and an end, and a series of arguments and a progression of them, and so on. So does much written language. We have structure in conversations, whether they are conversations carried on Twitter or other social media, or in threaded forums or reviews. So there's lots of structure in language. And we do need to go beyond simple information extraction, whether that's involving entities, facts, relationships, events, sentiment for that matter, to really understanding narrative, discourse, and argument. In other words, argument. How do I convince you about something? How do I make you understand what I'm talking about and get you to disagree, or maybe get you to agree or maybe disagree with what I'm saying? So we have information extraction. We want to do something with the information that we've extracted. We want to structure it as knowledge for use for whether it's predictive purposes or for operational purposes in our organizations. We want to then have the machines take a step beyond to do inference and synthesis. Synthesis is pulling multiple threads together to weave something greater than what you have in any individual thread. We want, well, a lot of people seem to think that natural language processing, NLP, is synonymous with actually natural language understanding, having machines understand natural language. Natural language processing, well, 95% of it is understanding, but then right now there is that other 5% natural language generation, and that's going to be increasingly important. How do we get the machines to communicate back to us in our own native languages? So we want machines to move toward conversation, interaction, the kind of stuff that it takes to succeed in the Turing test. The Turing test isn't simply answering a question that someone poses to a computer a la IBM Watson. It's carrying on a conversation where the machine's going to learn in the course of that conversation and modify its responses based on what is being said to it. And ultimately, we want some form of autonomy in the machines, and then we get toward this great notion of the singularity, machines that are somehow more intelligent than humans, although not necessarily in the same way that humans are intelligent. So I'm going to dive into a few slides, 3, with charts from a market study I did last summer. Lexalytics was one of several sponsors of this study. The report is available for free download at the URL that I give here, so you can take a look if you wish. It's a study that I did in 2009 as well as in 2011, which used in the 2 years pretty much comparable questions in order to be able to give me some kind of the start on a longitudinal view, comparability between the two studies. And I suppose I'll do another one in a couple of years. It's not a scientific sample, as so many market research types where I'd class myself right now, working in studying IT markets do not do scientific studies with carefully designed samples and statistical reliability of the results. So, that's the way it goes. Also, in the work that I do, I have a certain degree of what you'd call selection bias. I reach the audiences that I reach. That's tautological. I don't reach, well, first of all, the vast majority of the world, as I said when I started, have no clue what I'm talking about right now and would not be people I would want to poll for this study. But also, I don't have such a great reach. into the world of people who do define themselves as market researchers or customer experience professionals and so on. There are other analyst types, for instance, Bruce Temkin here in the Boston area, who do bridge those areas. But in any case, there's a certain selection bias that shows up here. And for instance, my reach in law enforcement, primary applications where text comes into play. My reach in the law enforcement is low. It's much higher into the area of people doing voice of the customer, customer experience management, and other types of corporate applications. So I have 2011 in red and 2009 in green. People could obviously select more than one response to answer the question, primary applications where text comes into play. The top three here, the top four I should say, brand, product, reputation management, voice of the customer, customer experience, search information access or question answering. These are quite interesting because they involve listening, what everyone loves to talk about nowadays. People love social media listening platforms and so on. They involve listening that goes beyond monitoring Facebook and Twitter and other social media platforms into what really are social media as well, review sites. And we'll see more of that in just a moment. Review sites, places where people express themselves in their own language. So these are very important sources of business information for people who are applying or who are intending to apply text analytics. The search information access or question answering is something that I added in 2011 that I didn't have in 2009 because of the perception that I picked up in the intervening years there that that was going to be really important. IBM Watson is essentially, well, it's an answer questioning system given the Jeopardy paradigm. But anyway, it answers questions. Question answering can be very useful for instance, automated support, for customer service, all kinds of applications, medical applications, for instance. So, just to give you an idea of primary applications where text comes into play. What textual information are people analyzing, or do they plan to analyze? The three categories here where I colored the responses are ones that show jumps. Again, this isn't a scientific sample or anything like that, but where there's a marked change in the figures between the 2 years, that's where I have some confidence that there is a real difference there. Social is driving everything. I'm just stating the obvious here and putting some numbers behind it. Social is the driver behind the growth in text analytics, behind the growth in sentiment analysis. There's no question about that. And that's natural. People in corporations in particular are saying, oh, there are these people out there, they're talking about us on Twitter or Facebook or other social platforms. We need to know what they're saying. You just think about that. You're having lunch and you hear someone mention the name of someone you know at another table. Somehow you hear beyond your own conversation and you start hearing that other conversation. People want to know what's being said about them, their companies, their brands, their competitors' companies and brands, general market conditions that affect them, and social is the accessible way to do that. News articles, yeah, sure, online forums, important. Surveys are still very important. There's some backlash against social as means of replacing surveys and focus groups also, traditional mechanisms for gathering information in market research, because when you do surveys, you typically know who it is you're surveying, and you do have that ability to create some form of scientific sample that is more reliable for use in estimating. We see a big jump from 21% to 30% in people who are trying to tap reviews. Despite the problem of review spam and sponsored reviews and all of that kind of stuff, for which there are text analytics solutions to try to detect those things, there's a wide perception that reviews drive customer decision making. I'm sure we'll hear from John Kelly about that equation with TripAdvisor, for instance, and you'll hear about it from people who work with reviews, whether they're Yelp or Amazon.com reviews or any other of hundreds of review sources that are out there. And lastly, I see a decrease in email and correspondence. It's not to say that it's not important. It is particularly important in certain use cases such as in compliance and risk for corporate purposes, but those purposes are not going to be huge revenue drivers the way that monitoring social media and using surveys is going to be perceived as a means of really creating a jump in revenue and also reducing churn and all of that bad stuff. So yeah, email and correspondence is important, but it's having lesser importance in the corporate worlds that I surveyed. So one last slide from my study. Do you need or expect to need to extract or analyze? It surprised me that topics and themes, rather than the third item here, entities, was the top response. So I want to know, meaning someone who's using text analytics, what people are talking about in some kind of general sense, rather than needing to know about specific entities, people, companies, and so on. Now, that's a 76%. Most people do need entities. And sentiment, opinions, attitudes, and emotions sits in between. What this is telling me here is that people are interested definitely in sentiment, opinions, attitudes, and emotions tied to topics and themes and tied to particular entities. I want to know about sentiment related to Barack Obama or Mitt Romney, for instance, and I don't want only, oh yeah, that political article had a positive tone, which is almost useless in my book. And there are so many sentiment analysis providers and companies that use sentiment analysis from those providers that think that document level, let's call it, or it might be message level sentiment is enough. It isn't. I would guess that most people in the room understand that already. So those were 3 slides from a market study I did. There are plenty of other market indicators out there. Here's another one for the techies, the Stanford NLP course that ran earlier this year. I put a red oval around the social shares here, 3,255 tweets, Facebook likes, G+, this being a nerdy audience who actually use Google+. In any case, maybe someone knows the number of people who signed up for this. It was something like 60,000 people who signed up for this course. NLP is hot. Natural language processing, that is neuro-linguistic programming, I won't get into. But we do have an ambiguity question there. So another market indicator, I wrote it as Vox Populi, which I suppose is a 2,000-year-old term or something for voice of the customer, right? So tech stories of the last 12 months. I spent a bunch of time thinking about what I was going to tell you about in terms of where we are today with text analytics. And this is the list of 5 high-level items that I came up with that I decided I wanted to talk about. Now, I know that Sue Feldman talked about big data yesterday. Well, I have 5 items. I'm just going to spend a few minutes on each of them. I'll talk a little bit about big data and those 3 Vs, those 3 Vs being volume, velocity, and variety. And you have various people trying to add additional Vs, maybe value or something else. But those 3 Vs, volume, velocity, and variety, date back to a Gartner analyst, Doug Laney. I think that it was from the 1989 or some absurdly early in our IT terms date like that. APIs, platforms, and cloud services. Well, everyone loves cloud nowadays. I'm not going to say much about that, but I'll have a few examples here. Now, I am going to use a lot of examples in my talk. A few of them will be companies that compete in some way with Lexalytics. I'm very grateful that Jeff and Seth Redmore gave me some free rein to talk about other companies. But when I do talk about various companies, I will be using them as examples to illustrate points that I want to get across. Another set of stories from the last 12 months, a bunch of acquisitions. The acquisitions that I came up with in anything close to the text analytics realm were, interestingly, all acquisitions that relate to information access. Information access being a different and better and bigger term for search in my book. I list them here. I'll say a bit about them in a few moments. What I termed social media magic, when I first started this slide, that was social media analytics, but analytics is underappreciated and underused in the social media world, which is part of a point I want to make here. Because whether you apply analytics to understand social media or not, social media is just full of text. And it's a text problem whether or not you're applying an appropriate text solution. And then lastly, knowledge, enrichment, and integration. So I'll explain what I mean by each of these. Start with big data. It's easy to criticize work that other people have done, which is what I'm doing here. It doesn't devalue the work, but it gives you something to react to and explain against. So I used a Data Warehousing Institute study here by Philip Russum, who's here in the Boston area, from a month ago. It was published. This is actually presentation slides. Real-time and big data challenge for data management best practices. So this is about data management rather than purely analysis, although he does bring analytics and business intelligence in here. He talks about real time. Yeah, that's good old velocity, although there's some smoke being people who can't do real-time data are instead pretending that velocity in the big data world is about real-time analysis, getting answers quickly. That's important, but that's not the same as being able to use data as it is emitted or created. I don't have any bone to pick with Philip's real-time operation. Scaling up out to big data, sure, your systems have to do that, but I hate it when people talk about doing more with less. We're trying to do more with more. And we have the tools to do that, semantic and analytical tools to do that. Philip talks about interoperability among IT systems, but what we're really interested in is not dealing with IT. This is my little addition here, down with IT, up with users. We don't need these gatekeepers, and that goes back to the cloud reference that I had earlier, the as-a-service reference, the use of web APIs. We don't need these gatekeepers, and we don't want just interoperability among systems. We want the ability to fuse, to link data from those systems. This, to me, is operational. We're looking for analytics that can tie information from disparate sources to create something that's greater and better and more useful than what you can get from any single source. Just once again, to reinforce an example that I chose because the slide that the vendor created nicely illustrated what I wanted to talk about here. This is from HPCC, which is well, you all know what Hadoop is. A lot of people like to say this is better than Hadoop. It is a parallel framework. It is open source, created by LexisNexis in their risk group. And it does what we're trying to do here in the sense of pulling disparate information, structured records, unstructured records, news articles. It doesn't list social here, which I'll say something about on the next slide. It extracts information of interest from these different sources. It does some linkage among records. It does fusion, which is more than linkage. Fusion is really about taking that disparate data and creating models, whether they're predictive or different types of analytical models, that can take all that information from those different sources and normalize it in a way that it can be analyzed together rather than analyzed in parallel in silos. And producing different types of outputs. We have clustering analysis, link analysis. I told the folks from Angos here I was going to be referring to this because that's the kind of stuff they do, using Lexalytics as a partner to get at the information from the unstructured records. There's a little plug for you guys, and you'll describe that further yourselves later. So this is a really nice model. We pull from all kinds of different stuff. We do what, when I first got into the data analysis field, was called data reduction. No one uses that term anymore, but think about it. Data reduction is about creating filters that get rid of stuff that you don't need, that might be noise to you, even if it's not noise to someone else, and creating indicators or derived numbers that can really help you make business decisions. So we have a funnel here, we have a reduction here, and we have insights that really get at the patterns that are indicated in the data across sources. Well, it's funny, I have a Bellagio hotel review here. I guess one of the Lexalytics folks, geez, which one of you guys was it? Oleg was talking about using Bellagio. I like this review because we have good but not that good, because to me that refers to this. For instance, they have entity resolution here. What that means in this context is taking a bunch of names and maybe applying some co-reference techniques to decide that the president and Barack Obama are one and the same person. Currently, of course. That's entity resolution, and maybe you could call it entity analytics as well, to try to tie those entities toward additional information. But what about the other information content here, the content that is in a free text review, a voice of the customer review like this one, that is full of all kinds of well, relatively informal language, but nowhere near as informal as what you would get on Twitter, where you have short messages that's full of misspellings, fractured grammar. There's plenty of idiom in here. I see interesting stuff in here. I find it interesting this person gave the 4 stars when the review here is full of criticisms, but anyway, in certain contexts that would be an indication of something. For instance, you study the language usage to, as I mentioned earlier, to determine if a review is sponsored or fraudulent in some way. Where's the sophistication in this model to handle things like sentiment and opinion? Where's the ability to extend this model? I believe it is there if you want to program it yourself. But in particular, one criticism that people like to apply to Hadoop, MapReduce, whether it's implemented in some other kind of system, similar technology like HPCC here, the real-timedness, this is not meant for real-time processing. So, going on to my next point about where we've been the last year or so, platform plays advantages to APIs, application programming interfaces. I have 2 examples here of software that essentially operates as a platform or framework. One is ClickView, which is a BI tool, and the other is Radian 6. Lexalytics is one of several sentiment text analysis providers that plugs into Radian 6 in order to enrich the platform that they have. Similarly, via this ClickView API connector, you can pull information in from a whole wide variety of enterprise systems and textual and other sources into their tool for analysis. So, this is a solid trend. We see an explosion in the number of APIs, not just APIs, but of course the services that back those APIs. An API by itself is just a protocol, a way of hooking 2 systems together. So Lexalytics has, through Oleg, has launched one of these in the recent months. In any case, this is real interesting and real important, and I see a further growth in this trend toward open platforms, open frameworks into which you can plug the services you need when you need them, have models where you pay based on consumption or perhaps based on negotiated contracts, and get the capabilities you need. And for the platform providers, they don't have to do everything. They can go outside to specialized providers that provide the services that really are needed by their customers, in some cases by niche customers. Here's where we are on the 3rd item. Acquisitions, and I characterize them, the 4 of them, as related to information access. Autonomy was bought for something like $10 billion by Hewlett-Packard. Hewlett-Packard is trying to find a new business model, and that's interesting because of the size of that company, the volume of their yearly sales, so they can afford to pay $10 billion, and they did. And in the year since that acquisition, something like 20% of the executives, including the CEO Mike Lynch, have left the company. Well, so interesting world there. Endeca is essentially a search tool, an information access tool. In this case, has nothing to do with my being at the Lexalytics conference, but of course, Endeca is Lexalytics, I suppose, a customer more than a partner, because similarly, Endeca can serve as a sort of framework for the plug-in of external services like a sentiment and text information extraction service, bought by Oracle. ISIS is a search tool. It's not all that well known, but it's often purchased for embedded use, I believe, maybe in e-discovery systems, for instance. What I find more interesting about ISIS than the search is a product they have called document filters, which allows you to extract information from something like 300 different formats or sources of information so that you can pull it into other systems. And Vivissimo is was an enterprise search product, but it pioneered clustering and other manipulations of the search results to add value, to add richness for a user who wants to do an exploratory analysis. I'm kind of mashing up terms here. I love that word, mash up. Mashing up terms, exploratory analysis of search results. We see lots of that nowadays with so-called, with faceted search, with faceted navigation, with various forms of so-called semantic search. So I have a slide here. This shows Endeca Latitude, which brings together a variety of visualizations and information presentations of text-extracted information. It's essentially trying to do a form of, let's call it, once again, mashup of different types of visualizations on information from a variety of sources. In this case, I have an autonomy shot that looks similar in some ways. They both have these clouds here. In any case, it fits more of a search paradigm in that it doesn't have these BI types of visualizations. And then the third, I just chose to use a schematic, a diagram, a flow diagram from Vivissimo, which talks about the clustering and content integration and the use of a knowledge base, knowledge representation such as thesaurus or taxonomies and all of that kind of stuff. Moving on. My next point, social media magic. This is the slide that I said I originally called social media analytics. I removed that because one of the examples, the two examples I chose to use was Oracle Social Network, in this case operating as a plugin to Microsoft Exchange. I guess it's a server plugin to Exchange for use by the Outlook email clients. And essentially you can have social conversations within the Outlook environment. I suppose it's similar to Jive or other systems like that in that they're hosts of conversations, but there's no analytical component to all this. For instance, despite the Oracle purchase of Endeca, Oracle has strong search technologies, but there's no analytical component here, which I find quite interesting and a bit dismaying, but Larry Ellison certainly knows how to run a business a lot better than I do. My other example here, SAP Social Media Analytics by NetBase. You got this huge company, SAP. They bought Insight, which had, at the time of the purchase 5 years ago, unparalleled, unequaled information extraction capabilities. And they have to go out and white label a sentiment analysis system, a social media analysis system from a company that is probably 1,000th of the SAP revenues, maybe 500th of the revenues. What's going on here? Well, that's a question for you. Well, I don't really have a great answer, but other than that, it seems to me that a lot of these big companies that enterprises are looking for solutions are unable to keep up when it comes to social. They do stuff that, to me, is only a partial solution. They do stuff that isn't their own solution at all. Now, IBM has a lot of technologies in this area as well, and IBM has been very slow to successfully productize them in a way that would reach either the enterprise or the smaller organization markets. So to me, this is an indication of opportunity for smaller, more agile companies such as Lexalytics, but there are many others there. Let's go on to my last of the points, knowledge, enrichment, and integration. So in this case, I start off with my own little definition of semantics. Other people will give you their own definitions of semantics. In this case, it's a functional definition, what semantics does for you. I'll read it, semantics enables join across types and or sources and or structures So that could be information that's in a relational database with information that's XML structured, with information that is maybe just in free text. Across types, that would be textual information with information that is in a fielded record and so on. I'm sorry, I meant sources there. No, I'm confusing myself. Keep that one. Types, sources might be social systems versus enterprise transactional systems. So semantics enables the join by essentially finding a key, and it's a key based on meaning that is inferred from, going back to that word I used at the start, from context. We have to have a meaningful identifier. In the relational database world, this would be a join key. Typically, it's going to have to be unique. In the semantic web world, which I'll get to in a moment, that would be a uniform resource identifier. There are other ways of doing the same concept. And we want to create an ensemble that's greater than the sum of the parts. When we do interrelate information across structures, types, or sources, when we interrelate information, we create and capture knowledge that can then be exploited for uses perhaps other than the uses for which the information was generated in the first place. That's what capturing knowledge is all about. And then functionally, once again, we have enrichment and integration. In order to do this, and I'll say a bit more about enrichment in a moment, we have to map and transform. We have to put things into compatible formats. Just choose a simple example. You might have information from one source that captures sales by month and information from another source that captures population figures by year. They're both using dates, or times, I should say, but they're using different periodicity. So we have to do some transformations there. We have to do some forms of mappings and so on to handle incompatibilities. We want to do some form of aggregation and collection. Aggregation, again, is pulling stuff from multiple sources, finding ways to make it comparable, finding ways it is comparable, and presenting it together, whether it's truly integrated or not. And we have all the usual data concerns: cleansing, profiling, consistency, security, but complicated by using different structures, different sources. Here's some examples of, I should have said question authorities. I already called IBM Watson in blue there a question answering system. Quora is a manual question answering system. It's a popular social site. I find it a great way to avoid work. I go out and say, hey, I wonder what people are saying about text analytics on Quora. What are the latest questions? It's a great way to waste time that seems productive. It's manual, however. And then I think Wolfram Alpha is just spectacular. Wolfram Alpha is backed by the Mathematica language. It understands lots of stuff, and it tells you when it doesn't understand what you're asking. But among the things that it understands is the keyword Oracle, which it assumes, with the chance for you to choose something else, is going to be the company. Presumably it assumes that because the prevailing use of Oracle in Wolfram Alpha is for the company rather than some other meaning. And it pulls information, it presents information in different forms that it infers someone searching on the word Oracle is going to be interested in. Now, Wolfram Alpha, just like IBM Watson, runs off what I'll call a curated knowledge base that is populated in part by using text analytics, by using natural language processing for information extraction from textual sources. It's curated in the sense of decisions are made about what to keep and how to tie it all together. So there's definitely a role for humans in this loop. What's another way of tying together information? Well, it's the semantic web. Question mark. Because semantic web is still not a reality. It doesn't generate business revenue except for companies selling semantic web tools and resources to other companies that are aspiring to create something on the semantic web. The essence of the problem is that it's a protocol stack and a set of standards and formats that people are using for various things, but there's no web to the semantic web. There's the ability to fire off ad hoc queries against known sources that will answer, for instance, Sparkle queries, but there's no web there. It does have a semantic data representation, which is in RDF, the Resource Description Framework, and this is a knowledge graph. This is a graph, and it captures knowledge. It says that the White House has an address, which is 1600 Pennsylvania Avenue. Instead, what we have as the successful model is what I'll characterize as a semanticized web. And here is an image of the Google knowledge graph in action. This is why Google bought Freebase a number of years ago, because it can use semantic web technologies, but not the semantic web, to capture information, to give you rich results, enriched results to queries such as Vincent van Gogh. There's an assumption what I want to know about Vincent van Gogh. I typed this query myself, even though they use it for an example. There's an assumption what I want to know about Vincent van Gogh that would include some of his more notable paintings, who are other artists like Vincent van Gogh and so on. There's a knowledge structure, a graph knowledge structure sitting behind here. So we have a semanticized web. Trying to tie these threads together, I have a somewhat complicated diagram that includes search in this greenish circle, business intelligence in the yellowish one, and applications in the, I suppose, light brown one. We have overlap areas. Semantic search uses text analytics, which is the inner pinkish circle. Text analytics or natural language processing tied together with search gives you semantic search. Information access is the combination of BI and search. I see search-based applications, for instance, for e-discovery or for online commerce as an intersection between search and applications. And in the middle, we have next-generation applications, customer resource, customer relationship management, enterprise feedback management, market research, and so on. This is really an area that we're trending toward in my view. So going back to my earlier, reviewing my earlier milestone slide, I put check marks next to a number of these items that I think we're pretty substantially have. We're not doing narrative discourse and argument in any way outside of research environments well yet. Are we doing inference and synthesis? I'm not even going to really tackle this last one, conversation, interaction, and autonomy, but let's look at two more examples. One, this is from an SAP. Somehow they managed to do something leading edge here. This is from an SAP augmented reality demo. It's not a working system. And it overlays, you take an image with your phone camera, and it understands what is in the image. That here I'm looking at a tower pipe in an oil refinery, I guess, and so on. It says last maintenance 2 weeks ago. It's going into a structured database and pulling information about it. This is contextualized, situationally appropriate information delivery. And similarly, although there's been a backlash against Apple Siri because of, for instance, information about abortion providers that somehow wasn't in their databases for political reasons, I suppose, and also for its inability to answer certain common questions, still, we do see a step toward conversation with the machine here. And Siri does pull on Wolfram Alpha as well as other sources in order to carry out, to do these conversations and carry out the operations that are being requested here. So going into some summative slides, a couple of summative slides. This again is a reuse of my slide from last year. I just crossed out the year and put in the new one because I think we're still pretty much in the same place. I'm not going to read all of the items that are on this slide, but sentiment analysis is the key one. The ability to get at emotions. Now, there are a lot of people who would not characterize intent signals. Is someone posting because the person's intending to buy? Or is the person maybe signaling that I'm going to leave my current cell phone provider? Generally we're talking about subjective information here, and I'm just classifying that as beyond polarity sentiment analysis. We need to know who people are, whether they're explicitly telling us via some kind of social handle, or whether we can infer something about someone's identity based on the language usage, the word usage, and so on. There's more stuff here that are still text technology initiatives. But what I'm really interested in, and what we're moving toward here, is we're moving up the value stack toward information and applications. There are lots of good text technology providers that can provide the basic functional capabilities for information extraction, rich, deep information extraction from text. Accuracy is always a problem. Accuracy, especially that responds to contextual needs, is still a problem. But we can move toward a focus on those applications, delivering text extracted information via question answering systems. You know, IBM Watson applied to medical domain diagnostics, for instance, and not just playing Jeopardy. We can focus on those applications. Siri, providing useful information retrieval that is situationally appropriate for what the person's doing at the time, wherever that person is. So we have moved towards signal detection, signals in the form of sentiments, emotion, identity, intent. Who is the person and what is that person trying to do, as indicated by the communications that the person has posted on social or online platforms or messaging systems. We have semanticized applications that allow the linkage of information from disparate sources, the mashup of disparate capabilities. Once again, the aim is to provide an ensemble that is greater than any one of the parts can provide in terms of the business value, whether it's business value to an enterprise or to an individual consumer. And we have rich information that is context sensitive and situational. Sigma for summation here. The sigma here is sense making. The summation is sense making. We have a huge pile of disparate information and we want to make sense of it. And sense making, I love that term. There are other people who have talked about it for a number of years. Jeff Jonas from IBM talks about it a lot. Sense making to me has a connotation not only of making sense of what you're hearing, in the broad sense of hearing, but communicating as well. If you're making sense, then other people are understanding you. We're trying to create machines that can make sense to humans. There's still a lot of work to do. I have one more chart from that study I did last year. I have simple polar sentiment, positive, neutral, and negative. Question about experience and satisfaction with sentiment with text analytics. That's not a great title here. Experience satisfaction with text analytics. We see some very high negatives here for solution technology ease of use. There's still a lot of concerns about how usable this technology is. That's not only how easy it is to plug in a service for sentiment or for text analysis into your system. It could be into Excel, it could be into a survey analysis system, but also how understandable and how confident one can be in the results that one is getting. That applies, those are factors in ease of use. And then the other big negative, relatively big negative that I'll pull out here is availability of professional services and support. Most of the consultancies that I know working in this area are very small companies. There are a few larger systems integrators, but there's a great opportunity there to provide professional services around these technologies. And if anyone's in that kind of business right now, I see only open road ahead of you. So really, that's all I have. You know, maybe if Jeff and company want to invite me back next year, I'll talk about text analytics, moving from sentiment to signals to sense. But we'll see about that. Now, so that's it for right now. Do I want to take any questions, or are we out of time?
Yeah, sure.
Okay. Are there any questions or comments? I'll be around the rest of the day, by the way. Mike,
Yes.
you're uniquely qualified to challenge me.
I have to wait for the microphone. Okay, shout at. Just on your last slide, on the spider diagram where you, Seth, you're in the way, the solution of technology, ease of use. I thought it was interesting, the second part of what you said was people's understanding and believability of the numbers that they get out of systems. Do you think that part of that is because they have unrealistic expectations of what humans can do compared with machines, and so therefore translate that down? We had, Sue was saying yesterday about 55% agreement with yourself on different days.
Right. Well, you're answering your own question. The answer is definitely yes. I love to cite the best scientifically conducted study of human sentiment analysis was done by Jen Wiebe and colleagues at the University of Pittsburgh in 2005. I love to cite that paper. Jen and her colleagues found 82% agreement in simple polar positive, negative, neutral sentiment classification among two human annotators, 82% agreement. When the annotators agreed that there was uncertainty in the thing that they were trying to annotate, then the agreement would rise to 90%, I believe the figure was. So humans don't agree. It's widely misperceived that humans do agree. I love to give an example. When someone notable dies, I can't think of anyone real recently. Take Whitney Houston from a number of months ago. Someone posts on Twitter, "Oh, isn't it sad that Whitney Houston died?" Is that positive or negative or neutral? Yeah, it has a negative tone. The person is sad. But the person is sad about someone dying, which is essentially a negator. So the person has a positive tone about Whitney Houston. You know, that's to me a great example of humans not agreeing on these assignments. Maybe one more, anyone? Okay, another Lexalytics guy. Carl.
Do one more with Richard, and then we'll take Carl. And then we'll let you get off.
Oh, you mentioned you were talking about SAP building something on top of NetBase and big companies building products on, or social media products on top of small startups that expose APIs, and then you said, what's going on here? Could you just expand a little bit about what you were talking about there?
I'll expand by giving another example. So SAS, the biggest pure play analytics company, about 2 years ago, I guess it was, launched SAS Social Media Analytics. And I was hugely disappointed because SAS has almost unparalleled deep data analysis capabilities, and they have been working with enterprise systems, customer systems, sales systems, marketing systems for decades now. And what they delivered was a siloed social media analysis that would analyze Twitter or whatever social sources with no ability at all to reach into the corporate databases that the company has been working with for years. And they perceive that the market for the social media analytics was interested and would be satisfied with something very shallow like this. It just wasn't, to me, was it a matter of thinking this isn't worth putting good talent into? It's almost a mystery to me. So essentially what I'm saying is I'm making an observation here, but without being able to really explain it because I'm not James Goodnight, the CEO of SAS, any more than I'm Lawrence Ellison. But I'm just puzzled by the inability of these companies that have been working with enterprise data systems, transactional and operational systems for years, their inability to make strong progress in bridging social sources to enterprise data to create that analytical lift that we're all looking for. Sometimes, you can pose a challenge or a question without having the answer, frankly, and this is an example of that. Carl, did you want to ask something?
Yeah. So my question, there was something that you said right at the end of your answer to Mike that I found very interesting with the example with Whitney Houston. It seems as though there's certainly a challenge in getting the machines to do better sentiment analysis. But there also seems to be a challenge in communicating what the results mean to different people. So like your example of Whitney Houston, person being sad about Whitney Houston dying, there needs to be some sort of explanation behind whatever sentiment analysis there is there. Do you see companies that are, or vendors or communities of users that are trying to really frame how do we communicate the analysis of this kind of data in a different way that's going to make it more accessible?
So two things. I made a reference earlier on at some point about machines trying to infer the intent of the person doing the search or the query or whatever, which is very difficult to do if you have only a few keywords for a search, to figure out what the person is really looking for. And if the person is searching for Bellagio, the person is probably looking for reviews and rates and availability and so on. But if you're searching on Oracle, does that mean that you're trying to buy some software, or maybe you're looking to make an investment or something? So this is where companies, for instance, look at the trail of queries that you've done in the past to try to infer who you are, what's your intent, what has been your behavior, what websites, we all hate tracking cookies, but cross-site tracking, but they are useful in building behavioral models that can say who you are and what you're interested in, so that the machine can understand that when you're searching on Oracle, that you probably are looking for a stock quote rather than to make a software purchase. So that was one. Secondly, so many systems out there, and I'll include, I don't know if the Radian 6 people are still in the room, I'll include Radian 6 there. They just take the BI dashboards and they slop a whole bunch of social extracted information on them, and they do essentially primitive BI types of analyses, the kind of analyses that a Cognos or a business object was capable and was doing 12 years ago, they're doing now. They don't have a strong concept of multidimensionality, slice and dice, the ability to nest dimensions and things like that. And they, to me, it's lazy analytics to just throw information up in a dashboard rather than to try to find visualizations and ways to enable the information systems users to interact with the data that is meaningful in the context of the business decisions that they need to make and the processes that they're engaged in. So yeah, sure, now I'm an analyst and a consultant. I don't have to do it. I can talk about it without having to do it. But yeah, we are looking for analytics that are process embedded within the everyday business processes that people are trying to carry out, the line of business processes, where the analytics are contextualized and presented in a way that they really do enable better decision making, not some external dashboard that has fosters what I like to call the decision gap. Yeah, what do these numbers on this dashboard mean? What does it mean, even that there's a certain trend there? There's no explanatory power to this. How am I going to make decisions based on that? I compare it to reading the entrails of a sacrificed animal or reading tea leaves or something like that, where ultimately the decision is made based on the skill of the analyst. The analyst sees clues in the data that's presented in that dashboard that support some hypothesis that the analyst might have. We can do better than that, and we can do better than that by creating new interfaces or finding the right interfaces that suit the type of information we're working with, the type of insights that are being derived from that information, the business processes that we're engaged in. Dashboards don't really cut it. They're just the default, easy, often lazy solution. Well, I guess that's it for my time. As I said, I'm sticking around today, and I'd love to talk to people and hear about what you all are doing. So thank you.
Thanks, Seth.